Hi guys, welcome back to the Library of Alexandria. And today, oh man, do I have a treat for you. It's my review of Boosh, Fireborn by Rosaria Munda. This is book 1 in the Aurelian Cycle. And guys, oh my gosh, I loved this freaking book. And I don't think I went into it expecting it to like it as much as I did. This is a YA fantasy novel that is based on many things that I love, which is actually what made me pick it up. So if you watch Elliot Brooks' channel at all, she has been raving about this book since last year. And it's been on my radar to read, but one day Elle sent me a message that said that the author's basis for the second book was the Iliad and Sophocles. And at that point, I took everything I knew about the first book, which that is based on the Iliad and Plato's Republic and the Russian Revolution, and I combined it with what the second book's gonna be about, and I'm like, okay, I gotta read this book before the second one comes out. And I finished it just under the wire before the second one comes out. In fact, I just started the second one, and I'm so excited to finish it. So, Fireborn is loosely based on the Aeneid and the Russian Revolution and Plato's Republic. And it takes place in a post-revolutionary world from the beginning. What really made me read it is after I heard that is I went on Amazon and I read the preview of, they give you the couple pages, and I read the prologue, and I'm not sure I've been gripped that quickly in a book in I don't know how long. I encourage you to do the same. Read the prologue of Flamefall, and if that excited you, you're gonna love this book. I promise you. Because I read, the prologue is it's just in italics. At the beginning of these chapters, they have some of these italic sections, which is kind of like flashbacks to what's called Palace Day, the day of the revolution, or the day that they stormed the palace after Red Month or whatever they called it. And it's just from the perspective of, it says they would call him the Lord Protector, but he was responsible for the bloodiest day in the nation's history. The city's name is Callipolis. This guy named Atreus, who was kind of an adjunct to one of these noble houses, and he led a revolution, and he overthrew the system, and he stormed the palace and let the peasants in, and they just destroyed the nobles. And we see him with this, taking down one of the heads of the noble families, and it's very Anastasia-like, and the Romanov stand-in is like, spare my son, and he whispers to his guy, and the soldier takes the son away and puts him in an orphanage, and that is where we pick up. And so, what was once this kind of nobility run by, it's called the Triarchy, I think, and where there's 3 different houses. There's Sky Mall? It's not Sky Mall. What is the Sky one? The Skyfish, Storm Surge, and Aurelian families, all of whom are dragon riders. And so the nobility are the only ones that have the power to ride these dragons, these 3 breeds that are the same names as the families. And he's overturned that system, and he's kind of established a meritocracy where everyone at some point takes a test, and you are placed into one of these 4 class colors. And this is where it kind of reminds me a lot of Red Rising, because they are organized by color. There's the iron at the bottom, who are the unskilled labor. Then you have bronze above them that are skilled labor. And then you have the silvers, who are the military, and the gold, which are philosophers. So it's the philosopher kings of Plato's Republic, the academics. And so that's how the society's broken open. Anyone can rise to any color based on that particular test. Now, there are still kind of the remnants of the old regime in the fact that these patrician families that were kind of aristocrats in that old regime, despite the fact that the 3 houses of the Tetrarch, the 3 dragon riding houses, have been cleaned out. But there are still people who remember that and remember how high they were in society, and they still look down on peasants and everything. And so that's where we pick up with this orphan of the Storm Scourge house. His name is Leo, but they call him Lee. And this girl that he grew up with in the orphanage named Annie, who is the daughter of this serf family whose village was destroyed by the nobility. And so they grow up together, and what results is what begins as kind of standard YA fare. You got the rich kids are mean to the poor kids, and you have the murderous bully trope, which ugh, I can't deal with murderous bullies anymore. But what begins as what you would expect from a YA novel turns into this just brilliant investigation into grief and trauma and censorship and what it takes, like what comes after a revolution, what it takes to establish a government, and all kinds of things that are just right up my alley. The politics in this book are just, they're fantastic. The politics in this book is so good, as well as the relationships between the characters. The characters in this book are so good. Lee and Annie, this noble orphan and this peasant orphan, growing up and watching them interact is some of the best stuff that I've seen, especially with young characters. So, with the politics, some of the stuff that I love is just shows the lengths and the costs of revolution. It shows, I love the stuff dealing with propaganda, from just how they don't like the word peasant anymore. They don't call peasants anymore. They call each other good citizen instead of comrade, as you know, after the October Revolution. They have to declare their allegiance to the state. There are people's assemblies instead of just kind of the triarchy, which has been eliminated. And Atreus is he is the first protector, and he just guards all the city. He's the main guy, but he rules at the behest of the People's Assembly and the kind of higher council. As things wear on, we start, you know, we see the strain of a new regime, because it's only been, I think it's been like 9 years at the start since the revolution occurred. So this is still a new regime in its infancy. And so, like, we see it struggle with censorship and censoring texts, and, you know, even purging things that it doesn't like. And as you watch these people at the top having to make difficult decisions, Munda really, like, makes us ask ourselves, is the new regime any better than the old one? When it comes to these these decisions over life or death, where they have to decide who lives or who dies based on whatever factor they want to decide, like when there's a crisis, and when the result ends up the same as under the old regime, do the people suffering give a crap what your motive is? Do they care that your intentions were better than the people at the top when your end result is the same? For example, if a peasant is starving, does he care why? Like, does it matter that the new regime didn't want them to starve versus the old regime, like, purposely making them starve because of, you know, bloat and excess? Like, the result is the same to the peasant. So does it really freaking matter at that point? And so watching some of these decisions that have to be made in the government, and the callous kind of calculating, very extremely logical, even as you're watching, you're like, okay, no, that situation makes sense. You feel total squick, like, in your gut, like, really? These are people's lives that you're, like, bandying about and bickering on who's, like, is this person's life worth more than this person? And why are these lives worth more than these lives? And okay, well, we can spare these people, but we can't spare these people. And it's just gross to watch that kind of, like, just, like, treating people as figures and statistics rather than, like, the human cost. And so watching those decisions be made, and then watching the disinformation, the way any government kind of spins information, just the dissemination of information out to the different classes of citizens, is also a really interesting discussion that I don't see in a lot of fantasy books. Even like adult political fantasy books don't deal with how different segments of society get different bits of information. In fact, I'm not sure the last book I read that wasn't a non-fiction book on a communist country. I'm not sure that I've read a book that dealt this much with kind of propaganda and control of information. And it was just absolutely fascinating to me. And at the end of the day, I'm not sure what answer you're left with. Like, what makes monsters? Like, are people monstrous for doing what is necessary, even if people are harmed in the process? It just asks all kind of questions like that, and it's on such a macro level when it's an entire government. Oh, this is good stuff. Like Munda knows her stuff and knows what she is doing. Guys, so fascinating. So at the beginning of this book, we see Lee and Annie and the other kids in their class. They've kind of like made it to like the top round of these tournaments, of the First Rider tournaments. Essentially, all of these, anyone can be a dragon rider in this new regime instead of just those people at the top. And so even serfs or peasants can be dragon riders. And so they have essentially tryouts where they have competition and fight each other. And there's different ranks, and it finally makes it to the top where they're competing for what's called the First Rider, which is the head of the aerial fleet, essentially the head of all the dragon riders. And their second in command, called the Alternus or Alterna, depending on if it's a guy or a girl. And so we see all of these people competing, and that's really kind of where the story picks up. There's rumor that we haven't, that the revolution wasn't quite as effective as it should have been, and that some of the royals have escaped and gone to this, kind of foreign land, and they don't know if like they were able to smuggle out any dragon eggs or anything, and so they're just kind of in training for the day that they need to militarily defend their city. And this is where, aside from just the political stuff, these characters are fantastic. They really shine. And this book, while there are tropes that Munda is playing off of, she reverses things all the time. Like, you think you know where it's going, and in fact, like several times you think it's building one way and it just kind of turns, and I'm like, whoa, like, okay, like, I like this new thing that happened that I did not anticipate. And there are some things, even from the very beginning, that just you don't realize the significance that they have until the end. There's one kind of late game reveal that I was just like, that just stunned me. I just sat there stunned, wondering, what? And I was just like, and it just hit me right punched me in the gut. Oh, it was such good stuff. And this book would not be as good as it is without the relationship between Annie and Lee. Because what could be just this will they, won't they love triangle, like sappy romance that's in a lot of books that I've read. You guys know I don't really love romance in books. And there is some romance in this book, but it is so realistic. And so, like, anyone who has loved and lost, anyone who has dealt with complicated relationships can see themselves here. Anyone who has sought comfort in the arms of someone that, is good enough for right now, like, and still feel bad about it. Like, it will tug on your heartstrings. It will strike several chords. Lee and Annie are two sides of a similar coin. And they really are stand-ins. They're microcosms of the society at large, because just because there's been a revolution doesn't mean that everyone's forgiven and forgotten. And all of a sudden things are kittens and rainbows. So the nobility that existed, like the upper class, the aristocracy, the kind of patricians, they still look down on the peasants. Like, even though it's a meritorious society, the patricians, and this is something interesting that it says about wealth and poverty just in general in our world, just overall. Yes, theoretically, it is possible for the patricians and the super wealthy to end up testing as an iron, but just like in our world, the people who have that advantage are the ones who are most likely to pass the test at the highest level, because they have all of these advantages that they're born into. It's not their fault, but it's there. And so, yeah, they technically could be an iron, but they're probably not going to be, because they study their whole life or their whole, childhood to not end up that way, right? And so they still look down on the peasants, and they certainly look down on the lower classes, like the irons, and to a lesser extent, the bronzes. And the serfs who suffered under the regime, they still don't like the dragons. They still hate anyone who's a dragon rider, and they hate any peasant who has kind of like risen up in the government, because they're kind of like, the traitors to the people who suffered down at the bottom. And so Lee and Annie are still suffering from this as well. They at the same time, they grew up together when Lee protected Annie from these bullies in the orphanage, and from then on, they were just kind of friends. And we learned things about their families, and they just grew really, really close. And we see that they're not as close as they want to be now. They both, it's very obvious from the beginning that they kind of have feelings for each other. So they like each other, and they may even love each other, but they also loathe each other. Lee cannot help the inborn superiority that he feels over Annie. And that comes out. He thinks he's always protecting her. And he when push comes to shove, does think that he's better than her because he was born a noble. He was born a storm scourge. And she, you know, was born a peasant. Munda does not shy away from like those kind of like gross things that we feel about ourselves. Like we don't want to admit that to anybody, that we think we're better than other people. But these guys do. So Lee is struggling with that constantly. And so Annie is struggling with the fact that Lee is one of the nobles who destroyed her village. Like she knows that he's a noble from one of the noble families, and it was the noble families that killed her that killed her parents and made her watch as they were burned in dragon fire. So she's got all that trauma that she can't reconcile her feelings with him because he's a member of that class. And at the same time, Lee is struggling with the fact that he was 7 when Atreus and the rest of the peasantry raided the palace on Palace Day and just butchered the nobility. Atreus just let them loose, and there was butchering and rapes and all kinds of just horrible atrocities committed. And so he witnessed his family torn apart by the mob. And so these two, like, they are still damaged. They both still have PTSD. They're both still dealing with this trauma that they witnessed as children, that they experienced as children. And so their traumas are constantly clashes. And again, just like R.F. Kuang asks in the Poppy War, can you compare trauma? Like, do either of them have it worse than the other one? Is one's trauma worse than the other's trauma? And if so, like, does one have to get over it so that this person can grieve? And just this exploration of grief and this exploration of trauma and the complex emotions between Lee and Annie, and then the other kids, a couple of which are serfs, a couple of which are patricians. The relationship between all of these kids is just so real and so authentic. These feel like real children struggling with real issues, trying to be the best they know how to be, trying to serve their country the best they know how, when their country has also betrayed them as kids. And so these emotions are just so realistically portrayed. In fact, I love the other characters as well. There's real relationships and real kids, you know, making out and stuff the way kids do. I'm a high school teacher. I see it in my freaking hallways. But I really love the female characters in this, all of the female characters in this book, really, but especially Krissa and Annie, because they are rivals competing for First Rider, but they are still friends. They're not mean to each other. Like, even when the feelings of Lee get kind of complicated, they are friends. Like, they're not trying to destroy each other and, you know, being like, you know, calling each other names and trying to, like, sabotage the other. Ugh. Like, it's just so nice to see these kids, at least the nice ones, like all getting along, even when they're put in direct competition. It's the same with the guys, except for the douchebag. But the non-douchebag kids, the fact they get along, like, it shows that, hey, guess what, guys? People can be in competition and not hate each other. People can just be good sports and be well-adjusted and just be kind people. Even if someone else gets something that you want, you can be disappointed, but you don't have to be a douchebag. Hashtag Walker Life Lesson. Also, lest I forget, there's dragon combat. And I don't ordinarily really like dragons in books anymore. Like, I like dragons like, you know, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, back when I read fantasy a ton. And I just got bored with dragons because I just got tired of the same way they're used all the time. But the dragon combat here is tense and exciting, and Munda really does something different with the dragons and how they kind of mature and how the riders are chosen. So I really think the dragons here are well done as well. And if you like dragons, you'll absolutely love it. And so the last note I want to make is there are so many classical references in this, guys. The Aurelian Cycle, this kind of book that they hold up as from the old regime, they speak dragon tongue to the old regime, which is really just this world's Latin. And there's this epic poem called the Aurelian Cycle, which is basically the Aeneid. It's about a destroyed homeland and a guy named Urien who left on his dragon and, you know, founded a new city, ended up founding Callipolis, right? Or its progenitors. and you know, they study it, and there's one scene where they're literally in class trying to translate at sight to their teacher this dragon tongue epic poem, and they're calling out figures of speech like enjambments or chiasmuses and synchesis, and I'm sitting there reading it, and it's literally an AP Latin class. It is exactly like when I was in AP Latin. It's exactly like the way I teach my AP Latin class when I taught it. It's, oh, I love that stuff. And they're constantly referencing stuff that's similar to the Aeneid. Everyone's name is basically from mythology or is Greek or Roman. Like, I just love spotting the mythology references, but all their names are very, very mythological. At least, especially the upper class ones. It's just so good. What Munda has created, the relationships coupled with the revolution and the government and the things that people are forced to do and the choices that people have to make. There are some tough choices in this book, and it all blends together just beautifully. Guys, I was never bored. Like, maybe it started a little slow after that prologue for the first, like, you know, couple chapters, but I was never bored. I was always surprised, and I just was glued to the pages. It was so good. I felt extremely strong emotions. I felt rage, I felt anger, disgust, and my heart broke at so many moments. It is just such a powerful exploration of the things that bring us together and the things that drive us apart, and difficult decisions that we have to make on a daily basis, from the lowest citizen to the highest person in the government. This is a fantastic book. On the Kingfin approval system, guys, I give this a superb plus. It's a superb plus. If I hadn't read the last two books of Price of Spring and Daniel Abraham hadn't created such a masterpiece, this would be my most favorite book I've read this year so far. But it's definitely worthy of the superb plus. Out of 5 stars, 5 stars easily. I cannot wait to dig in more into Flamefall. This book is so good. If anything that I have said in this review sounds interesting to you, and especially go and read that prologue, first 2 pages of the book on Amazon. If it sounds interesting to you, you will absolutely love this book. I promise you. I had such a good time. So good. Well, that's it for me, guys. Thank you so much for watching. As always, information about my Patreon and my Discord is down in the description, and I'll see you next time, guys.